Hello, hello.
Hello.
Welcome. How are you?
Good. Guess what? We're starting on time. Why? We didn't have any technical issues. Knock on wood. There.
Yeah,
I
right.
just realized I
Neither
was
one of
saying
us
it
is
out loud.
freezing yet.
Right. That's funny. Well, welcome everyone to the Beyond Nutrition Community Podcast, a space for slowing down, tuning in, and rebuilding your home from the inside out. We're your host. I'm Sherry, and this is Becky. We're just two women. We have been where you are. We were overwhelmed, we were exhausted, we were disconnected from our own bodies, and we've lived it. And we have moved through it, still moving through it, and have rewritten our stories. And you know what? It wasn't with quick fixes or more pushing, but with slow, steady healing and a return to what's real. So, we're here to walk with you as you learn to trust your body and honor nature's rhythms and create sustainable health in every part of your life. This is a place for honest conversations, gentle support, and a community that reminds you that you're not alone. If you're craving calm, clarity, and a deeper connection to yourself, you have found your people and you are in the right place. So, taking kind of a page from our podcast intro tonight. Our title of our podcast is Wellness Without Obsession When Healthy Habits Backfire. So we both lived it, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And this is so timely, right? There's so much information coming out right now. And I've even been putting posts out about the whole, backfiring aspect, right? Because everything can be beneficial, but it can also end up and be too much, right? And so this is so relatable to a lot of people right now. And so I hope it's a really empowering topic that is going to end up and help people to cut through some of this noise of the toxic wellness culture that's out there, um, and really just kind of position even ourselves as a voice of reason, because I was there. I was confused. I was trying harder and going stronger, and it didn't matter what evidence was out there, right? You could find a study for either side, right? But we're going to kind of open light and not create fear, not create shame, because people are trying to end up and get healthier, but they're doing the best that they can. And
Right.
that's where a lot of people, feel like it's not good enough because they can't meet someone else's, influencer pedestal standard, and that gets very hard for them, and then they end up and kind of feel like a failure, and just kind of a vicious cycle.
Yeah, most definitely. So I know this question applies to both of us, but I'm going to ask you. Um, you have followed different wellness rules, right? Um, but you always have said, since I've known you, it works until it doesn't. So, what is the first thing that you did that you realized, whoop, that's not working?
The first thing I did was complete elimination of dietary food. um it worked until it didn't. It's a great tool, but again, going back right to what I ended up and I said, it can be overdone. So things are kind of like this bell curve, right? And health wise, it didn't matter what I was seeing. I was listening to very influential voices, and I was trying, every way under the sun to make that method work, instead of really just listening and tuning into what myself was saying, what my body was saying, what my lab work was saying, right? It wasn't getting better. And um, it, it wasn't that I was trying to perfect it or, anything like that. It was, I just had the voice that kept enhancing and saying, that it would work. And so I kind of ended up and become a little bit obsessive about it. Um
We both.
yeah. It was like when I had family say, well, you're the one that, you can't eat certain places. And, it was just because I was so rigid and driven. But then it, socially, physically, like I said, I was doing lab work, I was doing, other things, and it wasn't working anymore. And I
Yeah.
really, even once I started to reincorporate, I was still, I thought I was doing fine, right? You and I have both been through this. I thought I was incorporating, right? But then when I really took that honest look and realized I wasn't doing what my body still needed, I was doing other things, right? The other foundational things, but I still wasn't doing what I needed to do. And
Yeah.
that's where I even take my clients now is it's individualized. It's not a blanket approach. It's not, some basic manual or guide, right? It's very specific to what I'm able to do. What I do, you wouldn't be able to do.
Correct. Correct.
So,
Well, and I think too that, and let's just start here, like over optimizing nutrition, right? The habit of, we both see the extremes, right? You track every macro or you don't track at all. Like it seems to be this huge extremes with our clients, correct?
mhm.
And
Yeah, go
what
ahead.
no, I was going to just say what are you seeing and why do you think that tracking versus not tracking, that over optimizing the nutrition, what do you think's driving that?
I honestly think that it's more of an addiction side of things. I mean, people end up and give up a food addiction, but you create that void, and it almost leads to an addiction or an obsession, right? Because they've created that void, and so even though it's a healthy habit, it can still end up and go wrong.
Right.
And that's where even if it's an obsession over pure food, right? You're still creating that a restriction around it
Mhm.
or unknowingly restriction around it, right? And then it also, I see it sometimes in some certain people, it creates a vicious cycle where they do really well, right? They're hitting on point and they're restricting, and then it's just a free for all, right?
Yeah.
They create this full on binge cycle. So it's like this restriction. There is the term in a few other cases that could vary, or a few other groups. I'm not going to call the group out, but where their eating style could very easily fall in this restrict and binge cycle.
Yes.
In a
Yes.
eating disorder person, or leading someone that may end up and have those tendencies. They may not be full on, but they may end up and have those tendencies. It's a very slippery slope, right? They're pushing a fine line there with those type of people. um and like I said, as for myself, that's where I, even with my clients, in the method that I just created, I literally just got off a session prior to this and was going through it with a client because she's like, it stresses me with macros. And I've had other clients say that too. When we're working on the nervous system and we're working on that side of things, and then you add this whole, food tracking, macro tracking, you've got to eat this, that can end up and be a stress. So I created a checklist form. I'm like, I want you to simply just have, not a build your plate. Well, I did call it build your plate, but it's not a eat your plate or whatever the food guide pyramid thing is right now. I can't even think of it.
Yeah.
But, it's not like that, but it's on more of like the healthy habit side of things. Um, and so, like I said, I created that because I'm like, if you just have these certain things in a meal, right, your whole food nutrition is going to end up and look a lot better. You can even go out with this structure and eat versus being isolated.
Yeah.
And, I had a client message me, and I just posted about it, where they were able to go to a family gathering, they were able to end up and go out to eat and followed the structure. So, that is the difference, because I can't tell you how many times people have freaked out, even in a restaurant, because they didn't know how to track.
Correct.
Even though it was, maybe optimal food, they were just in this frozen state because they didn't know how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there, that's the extreme, right? Tracking every macro. Now, do I think tracking macros is good? I do, because it gives me a picture,
Mhm.
right, of what I'm consuming, how I'm consuming it. Right now, I'm in an era of tracking, because I'm also watching my blood sugar right now real close, and I'm trying to correlate some things. So right now, that's where I'm at. But there was a time where I literally stopped tracking, and so did you.
Mhm.
And then we both have done the cutting out of the entire food groups.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I make that face, and for those that are just listening to us, I made an ugly face, because I tanked my thyroid and my hormones, and my blood sugar went so far out of control because I became a militant meat eater, like militant for 2.5 years, to the point that when I would go to the grocery store, and if some meat was cured with sugar, I wouldn't buy it. I was so militant, and it backfired on me. I know the same kind of happened to you, but in a different way.
Yeah, well, when I ended up and I went carnivore, that was one of the things. So there were things that got better until it didn't, and then it created, you could literally see it, because not only did my face start getting puffy, but like my midsection is where I started to gain the weight. So it definitely led to that insulin resistance, right? I've lost several inches because I've reversed that, right? But yeah, the thyroid specifically, the antibodies, they did not respond the way that they should have, on a complete elimination diet. Um, they ended up going up, and my Hashimoto's was one of the things that full elimination did not help and fix. And I have made posts about that on my Instagram in regards of, the things that did not get better, right? The things that went the opposite direction, but within the first 6 months of, adding things. Now, have they gotten, even better? Absolutely. But a lot of that was also the fear around, you know, the fear of incorporating those foods. But once I incorporated them, that was one of the things that you couldn't argue with, was the lab work, right? It was in black and white that, things were better,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Anywhere from my thyroid to even my triglycerides. That was one of the other things when I was um, cutting the carbs. It doesn't necessarily, guarantee the fat burning side of things. It was just things after 2 years. So my triglycerides were really good. I was active, for anyone that had followed me, during the Meet RX days. That was prior to me doing the whole circadian stuff. So I was, in my basement at 4:30, 5 o'clock, because guess what? We had a fitness meeting. And so who was going to end up and host it? It was, me, right? And I would be in the dungeon, as I called it, during that time frame. But my triglycerides ended up and went from, 86 up to over 200 in
Mm.
the 2 years. Yeah, in the 2 years that I was eating nothing but meat and fat. So, it's things like that. have they come back down? Yes, they have come back down. Um, but like I said, there was just the the TGAB antibodies ended up going up, the TSH free T3. It was just there were there were things like that that were off, right? The low T3 because we needed I needed, no we I needed, right? Um that conversion side. I needed the carbs so that my body could end up and do that conversion um, of the T3, T4. So, yeah, it was, there were things like that that were messed up, but I just kept trying to end up and push on because they said it would get better, but it didn't until I reincorporated, started looking at, sleep, looking at nervous system, looking at, all of that and shifting my food focus.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of food focus, let's go ahead. Let's throw in the eating perfectly clean. I was a victim of that because I was following an influencer who pushed clean ingredients, clean. I don't even know. You remember during my phase of that, don't you?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where your militant type come
Yeah.
in, even if like the bacon said that it was cured with sugar, you weren't having it, right?
Right.
And that's the problem that I end up and I see with even with clients still is there are so many people out there saying, it has to be grass fed, grass finished. It has to end up and be all organic. It has to end up and be, blah, et cetera, right? There's a lot of people that even if they can just get like, is my beef grass fed, grass finished? No, my beef is local. This last beef come within a 5 mile radius of my house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I know where it was raised. Now, granted, that cow was raised on stocks and crops, in like this time of year, right? Where we end up when we still have stocks. It was raised on pasture. It was,
Mm-hmm.
it was probably brought home to the pen. I'm not going to end up and lie and feed,
Mm-hmm.
prior to going in. But like I said, I know where it was raised. So, did I get a whole beef? Absolutely. It filled my freezer. Is it grass fed, grass finished, all blah, blah, blah? No, right? But it still ends up and provides us with what we need. I also end up and, try to source a lot of my food local or grow it myself. My daughter just called me this afternoon. She's like, Mom, are you wanting, some FFA plants? Because the FFA kids grow them every year. And I said, I would love to, but I'm going to be gone, 5 days the end of this month, or we are going to end up and be gone 5 days the end of this month. Who's going to water my plants, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those things, right? I can't guarantee that in the next 3 weeks that our weather is going to be like it is today and not, scorch my plants and dry them out. If it was going to be, 60 degrees and raining, sure, absolutely, I'd love to. But, so I do try to, even the foods that I incorporate, like the peppers, the tomatoes, the lettuce, all of that, I try to grow it local, or I try to end up and get from a gal here local. If I can't, guess what? I get it from the grocery store. It's still, better than other foods that I could end up and source, right?
Yeah.
Junk foods. So.
Well, and let's talk also about the fasting, right? Because that's a whole thing. And we've seen community members, we've seen clients, we've done it ourselves where we fast when we're already exhausted, or fasting and eating one meal a day, fasting, I could go on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. And I really kind of have to take a step back and evaluate this, because fasting can be a good tool if the
Mhm.
body is in a stable state,
Yes.
right? Like there are nights where I will end up and fast through dinner. If I know that I've ate enough through the day, I'm not under eating, or if there's nights where I have to be up here in the office at 6 o'clock, I may end up and fast through dinner. I
Right.
don't skip breakfast,
Right.
right? Um, I have something for, first meal of the day.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, as far as the extended fast, even the fat fasting,
Mhm.
that is another thing, right? I ended up and I created a whole protocol around
Mhm.
fat fasting. Um, but again, it's not something that should be done long term.
Right.
It can end up, and studies have shown that even with the fat fasting, that lean muscle mass,
Yeah.
right, it can end up and drop. And in some cases where people are doing weight loss, and they'll always talk about fasting and it creates autophagy and it's muscle sparing, and even like the protein sparing modified fast, right, they talk
Mhm.
about how it's muscle sparing. But in some cases, I'm not going to end up and say in all, but
Right.
they've lost anywhere up to 50-60% of their weight is their muscles,
Yeah.
right? And when we start to end up and lose that lean mass, that's one thing that will slow the metabolism too. And that's, I've tried to be very open on my social media about the fact that yes, I have lost, 50, I'm going to end up and say 55 pounds. It was higher than that, but I also had a couple sick days in there where I didn't
Yeah.
eat as part of this last weigh-in. So I know I'm trending a little bit higher than that low, which I want to, right? That was lower than my goal. I want to end
Yep.
up and bring that back up. But anyway,
Yep.
it's not a yo-yo, right? I didn't gain 10 pounds and go all, binge on things, but I do want to bring that up. Moral of the story, as part of that 55-pound weight loss, my lean muscle mass is maintained anywhere between about 1 and 2 pound difference this whole time. It has been that insulin resistant midsection
Yeah.
fat, for lack of a better word, right? And a lot of people don't also realize this is why I say if the body is stable to be able to do fasting, because it does elevate cortisol. I know we see that with yours, and with other people. The fact of why is my blood sugar going up when I'm fasting? I haven't ate anything, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We've seen that,
But
especially
it's
on
a,
that 100 hour fast that I did one time.
I,
Remember?
I know that practitioner ended up and kept recommending you go, longer. Oh, we need to go longer. We need to go, and it's like, look at what you take this from a different perspective, right? Look
Mhm.
at what you are doing as far as your stress hormones. And
Yep.
then, yes, it does also, over time, again, not that fasting is bad, it is a hormetic stressor. But when done, overdone, right? Bell curve again here, we're on the opposite side of the curve. Um, it can end up and disrupt the ghrelin and the leptin signaling, and that's where a lot of people will start to see body symptom issues, right? Like hair loss, or they start to lose their cycles, they start to get headaches, they start to get very cranky. When I was carnivore, and I started to do that, was when Redmond Relight was coming out with a lot of
Oh,
their fasting
yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
And oh man, I was so moody during that time. I, you know, it was not good. But we were doing a 72-hour fast, and I was giving it the good old college try, and my sleep would only be like 4 hours. But that was because I was in ketosis and I didn't need sleep. And it's all those stories that we end up with here, right? Oh, when you're in ketosis you don't need as much sleep, or you're burning ketones, and that wasn't the case. And
Right.
looking back now, yeah, I definitely see a difference.
Well, I think the thing surrounding just the topics that we've talked about already is your nervous system is going to start to feel real unsafe around food. That is literally what I learned was I was so scared to eat anything that everything became bad, right? You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that stage too, right? But my nervous system, like, oh my gosh, I can't eat that. We can't go to that restaurant. I can't. Oh, I'm going next door to my neighbors and they're having birthday. I can't have birthday cake and I can't, and it was my nervous system was on overload. And um I wasn't allowing for stability
Mm-hmm.
in my diet. So going on to the next thing is let's talk about pushing workouts too hard.
Again, tie it back to the nervous system, right?
Yep,
Um, yeah, there's so many when you get that physical exhaustion, right? It a lot of those symptoms overlap too. When you are just overly exhausted and you're trying to push more, right? That kind of goes back to the addiction side of things too, right? There
yeah,
a lot of people have either a trainer or a coach who is this whole hustle fitness world mentality, right?
yep,
And they're pushing, right? Move more, eat less, move more, right?
mhm,
And they're prioritizing how that feels and what numbers you're hitting versus how you truly are responding and how the body is responding,
yeah.
right? Are you doing an audit of how's your sleep, how's your heart rate, how's your recovery, that whole side of things? And many times people aren't.
Did I lose you?
I don't know, am I freezing?
Yeah, you're freezing. Well, the thing is, if you're forcing your your workouts, right, when you're exhausted or you're overtraining when you're anxious or you're feeling guilty because you're choosing to rest or you're using workouts as a punishment, that is huge right there. So it backfires because it's going to spike your adrenaline. It worsens the burnout. It disrupts the hormones, and it literally starts making movement feel like a chore. So, what can you do instead, Becky?
In my back?
You're back. Well,
Okay.
you're still froze, but I can hear you.
You jinxed us by saying
I did. Oh, wait, you're back. You're moving.
I,
Yeah.
I'm at
And
least
you
moving.
stopped.
I was I was gonna say I'm still froze over on Instagram, but oh
That's
well.
fun. Okay.
I'm moving here. All right. So what can you end up and do? There's a lot of things that you can end up and do for the nervous system, for the energy side. Even just going outside, grounding, doing a simple walk, doing some stretching, doing some mobility work. There's a lot of even beginner type workouts that you can end up and do. That's again one of the things that I put together as part of coaching is just some beginner type stuff, right? Marching, um, counter push-ups, counter squats, calf raises while doing the dishes, those type of things, right? Can all end up and be done. Vibration plate is another thing that helps to end up and actually activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Um, so it's kind of a twofold, right? We get the benefit of exercise because it activates like all the muscle groups, but it
Mhm.
also helps support the body's nervous system. Um, yeah, there's so much that we can end up and do that doesn't require the overstimulation in a gym.
Right. Right. Well, and you're training for energy, right? You're not depleting. And the movements, I purposely use the facilities where I work downstairs. Why? Because I take the stairs up. It's a simple movement that I've incorporated into my days. And what did I say to you the other day about how I noticed my body's reacting to the stairs?
That you could end up and feel the difference in your leg muscles.
I can. Yeah, yeah. And it just from taking the stairs. Like, this sounds so simple, and yet, you know, and just in one time during the phase of me, working out, I was getting up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. Becky's gonna laugh here because she remembers that phase too, and she would be like, "Are you sure you want to do it at 5 a.m.?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I'm getting it done and out of the way and checking my box." And what was happening was my cortisol, my blood sugar was spiking even worse than what it would have had I just got up, seen the sunrise, and ate my breakfast. And when I did move, when I exercised, my blood sugar would actually go down. Think about that. It didn't go up, it was going down most of the time.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
that's where a lot of people end up, in this whole overtraining syndrome, right? Cortisol overload. They'll end up and they'll get injuries, but yeah,
Yeah.
they still try to end up a push through, right? They're not really listening to how the body is responding, and it definitely, like I said, it backfires anywhere from, like you said, the sleep side, right?
Yep.
Persistent fatigue also. And there's a difference. The one thing that I do want to point out, there is a difference in the muscles and using them and soreness or feeling, right?
Mhm.
Versus a quote heavy, right? This
Yeah.
prolonged that doesn't end up and resolve itself or unexplained, right? Um, One of the other things that I've heard people reference, because they're doing a strict ketosis right now, is a decrease in performance, right? They get plateaus, or they feel like they're getting this regression in the gym, and they're not hitting PRs because they're restricting, and kind of what they're doing, right? So there's a lot of things to end up and look at when you're looking at your training as well. What is your mood? What is your sleep? What is your effort, right? We'll put it that way. Immune system too. That's another thing with hormones and appetite and all of that. People don't look at their immune system enough. So if you're frequently getting ill, that means you've weakened that immune system. That cortisol side of things also has just really overloaded your system and created this. So really look at that whole HPA axis dysregulation, and eventually look at how your adrenals are responding to this.
Absolutely. Um, so just curious, what how can you personally tell the difference between when you're lazy and when you're burnout?
So the difference in being lazy versus
Mhm.
um mm, lazy, I would say, is when I just want to, curl up on the couch and like a veg, right? It's because there's a difference in exhausted and being burnout, burning the candle at both ends. Stress shows in different ways, right? If I know that I've done pushed too hard, right? There's been times, you know me just as much as anyone, right? There's times where, depending what all is on my plate, I end up and I just push through. And I
Mm-hmm.
get really on that verge of just being completely burnout
Mm-hmm.
because I'm working, you know, anywhere between 14 to 16 hours a day, um, trying to get things, certain things done, right?
Yep.
Um, the other side of a burnout is when you start to really become very anxious or froze, I guess, as far as it's no longer a joy. It feels like a chore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, lazy is just like I said, I want to curl up with my blankie on the couch and, not move, right? Not do anything, not, you
Yeah.
know, um, and those can look very similar, but again, usually the burnout side comes with some form of you have not respected your own boundary and put parameters into place, and you're just kind of on this marathon of stress with insufficient recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And it's funny because I can tell when you're pushing burnout. I can
Because
I
like I
can
said,
tell.
you hear it more than anyone, but
I do. I do. But here's the other thing too is the overstacking your morning routines, right? You've got this, I got a cold plunge and I got a journal and I got to meditate and I got to take my supplements and I got to do my breath work and all before 8 o'clock, right? And if I skip one, I feel like a failure. So overstacking your morning routine actually is backfiring. And this is like down Becky's like wheelhouse right now. Like she's chomping at the bit. So have at it, Becky. Let's talk about our morning routines.
well, and that's where many people end up. They do, like you said, try to end up and stack everything in, right? Um, when they really don't necessarily, I mean, they do, right? There's certain non-negotiables
Yeah.
that are always going to end up and be part of a routine, right? But many people think that they've got to end up and have, 20 minutes of grounding, and they've got to end up and have, 20 minutes of sunlight. They've got to stack that together, right? Go outside and get your morning sunlight. Even if I sit on my step, right? I can't tell you how many times I've, posted to Instagram that I'm literally eating my first meal, sitting on my deck step with my feet in the grass while the sun is coming up,
Yep.
right? Stack that together. It's the same amount of time as if I was just meal prepping and, fixing my breakfast inside. Prep ahead of time. Make an egg, breakfast casserole, make egg bites, make, something so that you can just grab it.
Mm-hmm.
I again was talking with a client and she's like, "You're wanting me to eat all of that for breakfast?" And I had, like a cup of or half a cup of vegetables, and I had, like half an avocado, and I had the protein source of some eggs. And I showed the picture of what my morning meal looked
Oh
like.
yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, you know, on paper it seemed like a lot, right? But in reality, it's like it really wasn't that a lot."
Mm.
Um, but a lot of these, morning practices, if you have to drive to work, that's one of the things that I know you do really well is you crack the window,
Yep.
right? So, okay, your drive to work is the UVA rise time. You
Yep.
don't have to end up and stand outside and do the grounding and do, sure, if you have the time, if you work from home, great, go
Right.
out. There's times where, my sunrise, depending on the time of year, is me standing in a doorway
Yeah.
putting a kid on a bus, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's perfectly fine. It's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. And that's where this whole wellness culture, biohacking space, they make this whole identity around in order to be healthy, it has to end up and be perfect. And a lot of times, when we work with clients, we're able to kind of structure that, because if you're working with someone else's plan, you're not going to end up and make it sustainable.
Right.
You have to be able to make it and tailor it to your life in order to create it so that it's sustainable long term. Otherwise, you're going to do it for about 3 weeks and fall off.
It's funny. So I'm taking a continuing ed class for my nutritional coaching certification that I have. And I wrote this down. So I'm going to read this, Becky. That's why I didn't call you at lunch, because I was absorbed in the class. And it says that people who move into this pre-contemplation mode, it's basically they've decided that they need to change, but they're not ready to change now. Does that, like, ding, 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 as you're listening to this? Let me give you a little more data behind that. So, psychology suggests that we have a tendency to reject a course of action that threatens our freedom of choice. I'll let that sink in too. Oof. Right? So if I'm telling Becky, this is what you're going to do, that is threatening her freedom of choice. Right? And so you become one of two different ways, and you become defiant or you become compliant. So if you're defiant, it says, I'm going to go do whatever I know what I want to do, and I'm going to keep doing it the way I'm going to do it simply because you tell me I shouldn't. There's defiance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Compliance is, yeah. I'm half-heartedly going to go along with it. I'm going to go through the motions, but I'm not really committed and I'm not self-accountable. So when it fails, I can tell you it didn't work. So I just thought that was such gold. And the other thing that I liked too from this class today was they move into the mindset that they might change, but the consequences of choice or change is the things that they fear that they're going to have to give up, and are actually that fear of giving it up, it becomes greater than the things they hope to gain from making the change. Right? So, yeah. And I see myself in that, right? And not just my clients, but I see myself in that as well. I know we see it in our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And some people, again, when you ask them to rate their willingness to change, they'll end up and they'll say they're, I'm 10, 10 out of 10 ready to change. And yet then there's still those times, right, where they're holding back and they're unknowingly creating that resistance. And sometimes they end up and they want to do the same thing that they're doing, but get different results, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, well, definition of insanity, right?
Yeah.
Do the same thing expecting different results, and that doesn't always work. 99.9% of the time you're going to end up, you may have that, 0.1% that something else has changed and it's made a difference. But and yeah, I do. I end up and I have clients, I had a client that it's taken us a while, and it just depends, how long are you willing to end up and be consistent with things before, you start to end up and see a change. And that's where many times people jump ship because there's something else bigger, brighter, and, better. So they're trying to, even though it may end up and be a false hope, right? They're jumping to it because it seems all bright and shiny and sparkly. But
well, and I will tell you a personal thing, was it a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, maybe. My husband and I were having a conversation. It was on the weekend. I think it was 2 weekends ago. And I was feeling down because things weren't moving as fast as I wanted to move. And my husband's like, how much did you weigh at your top weight? And I said, that I know of, 275. I'm guessing I was probably closer to 300. But the actual scale that I stepped on at one point was 275. And he said, okay. And he said, and where are you at now? And I told him, and he's like, you have lost 100 pounds. You know, how fast do you want to lose 100 pounds? And my body is very resistant on things, and it takes a long time to get stuff working right. Most people in my shoes would have given up years ago, right? And so that's the other piece that you and I have both have had to learn, was the hyper focusing on the stress, right? Some people take every supplement out there, or, oh my gosh, I'm going to do breathwork in the middle of living in chaos, or trying to hack my way out of burnout. And what's happening is it avoids the real root cause of things, and it makes you feel broken when these hacks don't work. So I know you're big on regulation and stress and everything. So what do you think?
Yeah, on the whole nervous system side. Um,
Yeah.
because that is one of the biggest, I would say, needle movers. You and I have had the conversation, like, what are the top 5 things that, you have changed? And that is one of them. I mean, not only doing, the breath work, right? But doing the grounding, doing my red light, and being able, no, I don't necessarily need tools, right? I'm not taking a bunch of, cortisol supplements. I'm not taking, the pills, the potions, and, everything else, right? I thought I had the study in front of me, which it's crazy because I just put this post out, or working on this post to end up and put out. So I'm going to end up and pull the statistics up because it is crazy to me. Anyway, the amount of money spent by the average person in the United States specifically, because you'll have to end up and wait for the post, because I reference it to like fish in a
Ooh.
pond and people getting sicker. But essentially, the the United States last year, Americans spent $5.3 trillion on healthcare and supplements and products. That's $15,000 per person on healthcare. And that's just absolutely insane, right? Adult obesity is over 40% in the United States alone. And, chronic disease is driving a lot of these massive costs. A lot of chronic diseases, if they just work on the basics and the foundational side of things, can end up and be reversed, because we know that metabolic condition and chronic diseases stem from, right? So if you end up and you work on these basics, if you work on the nervous system, this is how I'm relating it all back to your question. If they end up and work on the nervous system alone, rest is going to end up and be medicine, right? Again, schedule these downtimes, right? Without the guilt, right? We all have this mentality, again, that we should be doing more. We should be doing, working and burning the candle at both ends. We should be, we should be, right? But your body doesn't know the difference in a lion chasing it or if you are mentally, physically, or emotionally stressed out at 5, 6 a.m. or 11 p.m. at night, or not going to bed until 1 a.m. at night, right? All of this is, again, the physical, the overtraining, the food restriction, the, you know, psychological, right, around unhealthy choices, the whole behavioral side of things, ignoring the rest signals. I'm not saying become a lazy culture. We have to end up in, sorry, folks, we do have to do some movement, but a lot of these stress loads are aging you faster, creating immune system issues, creating those metabolic issues, creating mental health issues, and they're leading to the metabolic and chronic conditions that we are seeing in these people spending over $15,000 a year because, one, they're relying on functional and allopathic medicine to end up and treat themselves. And now I am off my soapbox. So, with all of that said,
I love it.
like I said, I was literally just going down this whole, rabbit hole side of things because I have posts coming out in regards to it. So, it really does take that whole reframing of the nervous system. Simple things, right? Again, making it work into your day and making it fit. Yes, breath work is important. Okay, maybe you don't have 10 minutes or 30 or 90 minutes in the evening to end up and do it. But guess what? You have 2 minutes before you eat your lunch to do some box breathing. Do it before your meals, right? There are vagus nerve hacks, humming, singing, even just a cold water face splash activates the vagus nerve. So you get up in the morning, splash your face with some cold water, right? Another thing of the nervous system is that gentle movement where I talked about, slow walks, rhythmic swaying, or I call it the Gumby dance, right?
Yeah.
Because I can't necessarily do it, sitting here in my chair, but sitting there and just swaying as you're out in the yard for sunrise. So instead of sitting on the deck steps, stand in the yard and just move. That's going to end up and move the lymphatic side of the system. That's all going to end up and, again, help the nervous system, right? Do it grounding. Guess what? That your feet on the ground end up and sense it, right? But the other side of that also, if you are somewhere in public, right, is doing the 5 4 3 2 1 method and sensing that, really making sure that you are bringing that back into the body and being present with it, because there are so many times people, whether it's a social anxiety or just a overwhelm with like a project, they end up and they start to get that anxious feeling, right? So again, it doesn't matter the realm of stress, the body is going to end up and sense it. And so anything that we can bring back to teaching the nervous system that it is safe, it is okay. That is also where people get weight loss resistance, is, or even the leptin resistance. They end up and their body doesn't feel safe, and so it's going to hang on to everything that it can until it gets that safety signal. So it is really important to end up and create that safe space.
It does. Your body doesn't need perfection, right? It needs safety. And I know that sounds kind of silly in a way, because it's like I could sit here and go, oh, I'm safe. My husband's sitting behind me and I'm in my camper, I'm on my property and I'm safe, right? But there's a whole nother side of that consistency from the calm and not pressure. I've put so much pressure on myself through, the nutrition side of things and going harder and faster and exercising. And I've just put so much on me. My body just did not feel safe, even though I'm telling you I'm safe. My husband's sitting behind me, I'm protected. And I also, and I know you're a big one on this one too, your habits should match your seasons. And people don't even take that into consideration. Like it's spring right now. Like, what are we doing here? Well, my hands have been in the dirt and I'm planting things. Now I'm in Texas and you're in Nebraska. So, there's a little difference here right now getting, where our planting seasons are. Um, but can you briefly talk about the seasons and where those habits should change?
Yeah. So obviously it's raining and it's 50 degrees here. So I'm not planting much of anything right now. But no, yes, as we we'll back up a couple seasons here, right? So the fall time, we're winding down, we're preparing for winter time, those type of things, right? Winter time is more that rest and repair, right? Our days are shorter, nights are longer. It's automatically that, time where the nervous system should really end up and be building that safety. Um, yes, your body is going to start depleting some of the vitamin D. Also, if you are someone that is not supplementing vitamin D, it will end up and start to, naturally, right? Because we lose that UVB window, but also just to, go through the winter season, that will start to end up and decline. So, being able to really take that lower energy focus, less intense, not doing the hit training, not doing, those type of things that are going to end up and spike the cortisol and deepen that fatigue any more than what it is. We should be relaxing. We should be low light in the evening, red light, all of those type of things. Our foods end up and change too, from more of like the spring and summer foods into the fall. The winter has more of like those nourishing warm soups, stews, those type of things, where now, as we're coming out of winter, yes, you already kind of end up and have that early spring, right? The energy starts to end up and change, the light starts to change. If you are very aligned circadian wise, right, you start to end up and build up that solar callus to where you're ready as we transition into, summertime of like this peak sun, right? This higher intensity, those higher wavelengths, that higher UV index, and you're really preparing for that. And so those carbs may end up and shift a little bit because let's face it, we have things like, the salads and the cucumbers and the squashes and a lot of those lower glycemic. But the other side of that is we do end up and have more of the fruits. So you may still end up and have carbs. It's not that we ever necessarily need to go low carb in any of the four seasons, but it's a case of the carbs are shifting, right? And they're restoring and they're replenishing. And some of them have, higher water content. So, it's the same basis of routine. We're not, ignoring it, right? We still end up when we still need sleep, we still need light, we still need food. It's just we're changing kind of from this, high intensity into more of like a regulation, and then we kind of come up and we start to build the intensity. We start to end up and come alive, if you will, just like plants end up and kind of bud and then flower and blossom it as they end up and they go into summer and stuff. So it's just, as we kind of look at this, it's how we end up not to fail with our habits, but our habits need to evolve and transition with the season.
Yeah.
And the light and the temperature and all of that ends up and shifts the hormones too.
Oh, most definitely. So I'm going to challenge our listeners and folks, for you watching or you listening. I'm going to put a challenge out there. What is one habit that you can simplify? On everything that we've talked about tonight's podcast, what is one habit that you can simplify? Put it in the comments. We want to know what you can do. Just one thing. That's all we're saying. One habit to simplify? What can you do? Anything you want to add to wrap up, Becky?
I
I'll
just
talk about next week as well.
I just want to end up and say the most consistent people aren't the rigid ones, they're the responsive ones. And true wellness of the whole body ends up and flows with the seasons of life, not against them. So don't create a resistancy, create consistency.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. With that, and I just lost it. Okay, there we go. So next week we're having our coaches roundtable. And we got an extra coach that's going to join us. He was our guest last week, Coach James. We were talking about the title of our podcast, our Coaches Roundtable next week. And it's titled When Motivation Dies and the Truth No One Tells You. And Coach James lit up and was like, I want to be a part of the coaches roundtable. So we're going to have 4 of us. And I think it's going to be great because he comes from a male perspective. And of course, Becky, myself, and Coach Sly, we all come from different walks of life as well in different areas of our healing. So what am I talking about? Well, motivation isn't supposed to carry you when it disappears. And most people think that they failed. And so in this roundtable, we're going to break down what really happens when motivation dies and why your body shuts down and what kind of simple shifts that actually get people moving again. No hype. Right. This is no guilt. We're just going to be having a roundtable discussion. Please post your questions for this roundtable because you're going to get 4 coaches. You're going to get 4 for the price of 1 and we're free. So there you go. That almost sounded too good to be true, didn't it?
Absolutely. But yeah,
So funny.
definitely end up and post those questions. If you are listening to the replay over on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, any of our listening platforms, definitely post those comments and questions there as well. And we love and appreciate all of you listeners. I'm glad you jumped in tonight. If you were just jumping in and you were late to the party, definitely end up and go back and listen to this one.
Absolutely. Well, listen, if you're fired up about something you've heard and you think somebody needs to hear it, please share this episode. And of course, we love it when you comment and you like and subscribe. So we will see you all next week for our 4 coaches round, which is going to be fun. So I'm excited for that.
Awesome. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.